The year was 2003, and I had just finished the hardest meditation course of my life at Dhamma, the Vipassana Center in downtown Yangon. This was my first visit to Burma. A Japanese friend sitting the course with me had found out that Sayataji, a teacher in that lineage, had taught at a meditation center across Yangon River over a century ago, and after the course we set out to find it. I'll never forget the feeling of discovery that day, as well as the immensity of how much history and faith were surrounding me every turn. Somehow, I landed back in Myanmar a few years after that fateful trip, and have been continuing that journey of discovery ever since. This podcast platform is the latest outgrowth of that path, sharing what I find with other like-minded souls. I hope that you find the show that follows nearly as inspiring as we did while making it. If you reference the Philippines, at least for non-Filipinos, it might spur typical connotations like jeepneys, adobo, halo-halo, pristine beaches, and a love of basketball. Or perhaps for those more historically inclined, the weight of the Spanish and American occupations, General MacArthur promising he shall return, the Marcos regime, or more recently Duterte. One thing that may well not come readily to mind is vipassana meditation, or Buddhist practice of any kind for that matter. Interestingly, this heavily Catholic island nation seems to be the only region in all of Southeast Asia that has had hardly any touches with the Dhamma over the course of the last 2,500 years plus. So why would a podcast based on Buddhist practice, with a specific focus on Myanmar, dedicate a series of episodes to the Philippines vis-a-vis the Golden Land? The answer is largely embedded in the very wording of the question. It's to explore the single country in the region that, while having no past historical influence with Buddhism or the related monkhood, is now appearing so open and receptive to the teachings of the Buddha. I'd like to share my own personal experiences with the country. I found the Filipino people to be some of the most welcoming and friendliest that I've ever met anywhere in the world. I visited there a handful of times, partly as a tourist to relax on its famous beaches and tour some of the World War II sites, and partly as a meditator to join and serve its growing Dhamma community. I was part of the very first Vipassana course in the Goenka tradition held in Cebu, hosted at a Catholic nunnery if my memory serves me right, and I stayed on at the then temporary Goenka Center in Cavite outside of Manila. I've long harbored a dream of organizing a pilgrimage that could inspire serious Filipino yogis to experience the treasures of Myanmar, which hopefully this podcast will address. So let's get right into the guests we have coming up in this very interesting episode. The first is Tony Fernando. The brother of a business associate based in Yangon, Tony yearned to be a monk and dedicate himself to the practice of loving-kindness meditation, and his brother asked if I might be able to provide guidance. Tony eventually fulfilled his dream by ordaining several times at Chiam Mae Mieng Monastery, and one year actually we shared noble silence on a course together. In his professional life, in addition to being a cellist, Tony is also a psychiatrist at the University of Auckland and is today one of the leading sleep researchers in the world. He's now completing his PhD by bringing these two worlds together and trying to introduce compassion into the field of sleep study. And he has also begun a mindfulness training program at the Mount Eden Correctional Facility. The second guest is Aimee Contreras, who has dedicated herself to bringing Dhamma to her native country in fundamental ways. She is founder of Mindfulness Asia, the co-founder of the Philippine Insight Meditation Community, has brought mindfulness programs to incarcerated women and sexually abused women and children. Additionally, she has also taught in the US at Spirit Rock and UCLA. I'm really excited about the show we've put together. These two guests bring diverse and powerful stories to the contemporary spread of Dhamma into new areas of our world. Our speakers are a living testament to the fact that, while the Buddhist teachings may have had little impact on this island nation up till now, that is certainly no longer the case.
Hey, Tony, welcome to Inside Myanmar.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me, Zach.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here. You're there in New Zealand, is that right?
Yes, I'm in Auckland, the biggest city in New Zealand.
Right.
About 1.5 million people. Yep.
And what are you doing there, if you don't mind me asking?
Doing as in work or doing at the moment? No, I'm a psychiatrist and a sleep specialist. So I work mainly with patients who have sleep issues. And for about 20 years, I have been part of the medical faculty here. And recently, just simplifying my life and focusing mainly on clinical work so that I can do more volunteer work in prison where I teach meditation and managing emotions to inmates.
Oh, wow. And how long have you been there in New Zealand?
Since 98, so 22 years.
22 years. Right.
Yeah.
And you're originally from the Philippines, correct?
Yeah, so I'm from the Philippines. That's where I did most of my education, and then moved to the US to do my internship and residency training in psychiatry, and then got recruited by Auckland Hospital in 98. So I moved to New Zealand in 98. It's my first proper job as a doctor in New Zealand.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I understand that you practice and studied Dhamma quite extensively, and I find that interesting because Philippines, of all the other Asian countries, is the one that was never touched by Buddhism. So I'm wondering just what that was like. So I'm interested in perhaps you could tell did you grow up in the Philippines, and then what was that like? What kind of family did you grow up in? What was the religious?
Yeah, so that's a whole chapter in my life. I come from a very Catholic family.
Uh-huh.
So I went to Catholic school. My family, they're regular churchgoers, were active in church. And then I went to a Benedictine school for boys. And at one point, I actually was a junior monk as a Benedictine in Manila for about 6 months.
All right.
And then decided to leave and join the medical school. So growing up was quite Catholic. Buddhism is actually way after my medical school training.
Uh-huh.
It's when I became interested in it. Actually, when I was already a practicing psychiatrist. But for the first part, probably first 25, 30 years of my life, I didn't care anything about Buddhism at all. For me, it was this weird and exotic religion practiced by some of the Filipino Chinese Buddhists, where they do a lot of chanting and all sorts of rituals. So I've always thought of Buddhism as this interesting, exotic, but never really interested me for the first part of my life.
So when you were young, there's quite a strong influence of Catholicism. What was your actual relationship to it? Did you take to it, believe in it, or was it just something you did because of your family? Or what was your relationship with Catholicism?
I was actually an extremist. So I wasn't a casual Catholic. I don't do things casual. So I really believed in it. Like, I think I would have one of the strongest faiths in my family, to the point that I think 3 times in my younger years, I've seriously thought of becoming a priest and a missionary.
Right. Uh-huh.
And I was also involved with an organization called Opus Dei. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that group. It's a very conservative.
Didn't Dan Brown make that popular? Isn't that in
Yeah,
that book?
yes, but his depiction is not very accurate.
Right. Okay.
But it's a very conservative section of the Catholic Church, and I was going to a center of Opus Dei, and that also shaped my thinking of Catholicism, bringing it to a more of an extreme, quite orthodox
Right.
view of the faith, to the point that I think when I was in medical school and I was quite active in Opus Dei, I was called a cooperator, so that's my official title in terms of my relationship with Opus Dei. I was so very much into the belief system that if the Pope at the time called for a holy war, I will volunteer.
Right. Okay. So
That's how I was willing to die for it.
you were all in.
Very
Right.
much in. And
Right.
at that time, my belief was anyone who's not Catholic and anyone who's not receiving the sacraments regularly, they will go to hell. And I
Right.
believed that, really believed in that.
And that carried out throughout your studies as well in medical school? It sounds like at least
Yep,
some degree.
throughout, no, definitely throughout medical school. And things changed when I left the Philippines. I lived in New York. So quite a big change
Okay.
from Manila to New York.
Yes.
And for the first time, I have incredibly good friends who are not Catholic.
Oh, okay.
So that shook me a
Right.
bit. That shook me a bit. I have Jewish friends. I have Muslim friends. I have atheist friends, Protestant friends. And I started asking myself, these are good people.
Right.
If there's such a place as heaven, they might even go ahead of a lot of my Catholic friends. But that started me questioning
Right.
some of the things I believed in, because these are incredible people who are moral and kind.
Right.
Because my belief was, anyone who's not Catholic or practicing Catholic, they're monsters, or they're going to hell. They're bad people.
Right. Right.
So that started so that unshackled me a little bit from my faith, and I started asking questions about Catholicism and Christianity and the Bible. So I drifted gradually towards becoming agnostic or atheist, or being an atheist.
Right. Was it which one? Yeah, which one was it? Because those are different, right? One is like, well, I'm not sure anymore. I don't really know, and the other one's like, I really don't believe in God or theology.
Probably more.
Right.
It fluctuates. Everything's impermanent. Most of the time, at that time, it was more agnostic.
Right.
But later on, at this point in my life, if there's something, I'm not sure if I consider myself agnostic. I think I'm more of an atheist
Right.
now. But even saying that, interestingly, gives me the creeps, because I'm conditioned to think that to be an atheist means going to hell.
Right. So there's still a little bit of that residue in there of those hooks.
Especially if I'm talking about it publicly. If on my own, or I'm talking to you online, and this will be broadcasted. But if I'm talking to intimate friends, I'll say, I'm an atheist, and there will be less of the guilty feeling. But broadcasting it in public, I still have lots of friends who are strong Christians,
right?
Or people of faith who would probably cringe when they hear that I'm an atheist.
Right. And as you said that, you almost sounded a bit, were you actually surprised at that time in your life to have that faith kind of challenged a bit by experience? Did it kind of catch you by surprise somehow, or was it pretty smooth?
No, it was very gradual.
Right.
So nothing nothing earth-shattering that suddenly, oh wow, I have this insight. God doesn't exist. Nothing like that. It was gradual, and I'm comfortable about what I think about God at the moment. Like I don't think he exists. Sometimes I tell myself, if he exists or she exists or it exists, I hope he or she will be kind enough to let me in heaven since I try to live a good life, but I don't think you exist. So that's my current dialogue.
You mean you're hoping God doesn't have?
I still try to have this loophole.
You're hoping God doesn't have such an ego that he'll forgive you for not believing in him. That'll be okay if you're a nice person. So okay,
so there's still that little yeah.
It sounds like it was quite a gradual fading, for lack of a better term, instead of a sudden thing, as you said. Now, what were your first touches with the Dhamma, and how did that come about? And when, like how, as things faded, was there a long period where, there was just more of a secular life, or how did that unfold? Or did you replace Catholicism with something new, or how'd that happen?
I think there was a few years gap of not being interested in any organized religion at all. But I became interested in Buddhism initially with mindfulness. So as a psychiatrist, I would see patients with different types of conditions. And there's one condition called borderline personality disorder, which is a very difficult condition to treat.
Right.
A lot of medications don't work. A lot of different psychological approaches don't work. However, at that time, mindfulness was starting to be used, and a few of my patients improve. Like instead of regularly self-harming or wanting to kill themselves or having very dysregulated emotions, after doing some mindfulness courses, they're better. So I was curious about mindfulness. Like if this works on my patients, I'm sure it will help me as well. So that's my first introduction to something Buddhist related. So I did some mindfulness courses.
Can I ask you, who was directing them at this time towards the mindfulness? If it was new to you, it doesn't sound like it was you, but then you got to see the results of it. Is that how it unfolded?
Yes. So some of the psychologists have trained in secular mindfulness. So it's not really Buddhist it's basically mindfulness taught in a very secular manner. So my patients were getting psychotherapy from these psychologists, and they learned basic mindfulness approaches.
Okay.
Being accepting of their emotions, recognizing them instead of shutting them away or wanting them to, or pushing them away. And then a lot of soothing techniques. So it's not exactly similar to mindfulness as we learn it in Buddhist centers or monasteries, but it's similar.
Right.
So when I saw that my patients were improving, I said, "Oh, I want to learn a little bit of that too."
Did you talk with the psychologists at all that were practicing? Did you work closely enough with them that you had access to them, or?
No. I wanted to do it on my own.
Okay.
So I did some research, and I also wanted to learn it from a Buddhist center. Because I heard it was taught by Buddhists as well, or practiced in Buddhism. So,
Can I ask? Do you have some idea why you wanted it to be less secular? Any idea what was the appeal of it being Buddhist rather than just mindfulness? Do you have any idea about that?
I'm not sure exactly, but probably because I want to get it from the source.
Okay.
I tend to, I tend to be, how would you say, I tend to be a little snobbish when it comes to intellectual pursuits. So if someone's teaching something, okay, I can learn it from that guy, but if I can learn it from the best person available,
okay,
that's what I'll do.
Right. So that's what it was about. Okay. Yeah. So what steps did you take? You said you're at a Zen center.
So I learned it initially. Well, I actually didn't learn it from a Zen center. I went to a Zen center, and there were no instructions, and I was just asked to sit in front of a white wall. And I persevered for a few sessions, but it was it didn't
Right.
click with me. So I went to a what you call a Western Buddhist order. It used to be called Western Buddhist order, but it's now called Triratna,
Oh, okay. Right.
which is a secular lay. It's a lay Buddhist organization.
Right. I've heard of it. Right.
And that's where I learned mindfulness
okay.
properly. So they had a really nice 6-week course on mindfulness of the breath, mindfulness of the body, and metabhavana. So I learned it from them.
Some actual instructions, right?
Very good, very good instructions. In fact,
as opposed to nothing and just sitting in front of a white wall. Some people might get it that way, but
yeah, not me. Like I'm very impatient. And around that time, I think it was around that time that I was in an airport in Sydney, and I chanced upon a book by the Dalai Lama.
All right.
Called The Art of Happiness, I think. The Art of Happiness.
Yes. Famous book. I've read it too.
And the only reason I think I picked up that book was because the book was co-authored by a psychiatrist.
Ah, okay.
If it was mainly the Dalai Lama talking or written by someone else, I wouldn't have picked it up. But because it's a psychiatrist, I got intrigued.
Some kind of connection there.
Yeah, he followed the Dalai Lama for, I think, a few years and interviewed him about anxiety, about stress. And I had this light bulb moment of, I can't believe this. This Buddhist teacher has an incredible understanding of what suffering and anxiety and stress is.
Right.
In a totally different paradigm from what I've learned in psychology and psychiatry.
Right.
So I actually cannot put down that book. So when I came back to New Zealand, I said, I want to learn more about this. And eventually went to conferences in Australia organized by Tibetan Buddhists. It's actually an international conference called Happiness and Its Causes. And the Dalai Lama is a regular speaker there. So that's where I got to know more about different traditions. I got to become friends with Tibetan Buddhists. And then, I visited Tibetan monasteries. That's another story as well. But it reminded me so much of Catholicism that it didn't click with me. Right. Those are the initial contacts.
There's been that comparison, actually.
And I can see it. In fact, in a weird way, I'm not sure a weird way, but when I stayed in a Tibetan monastery in Kathmandu, and I really loved the chanting and the music, the singing. However, they had this particular ritual using incense, and the incense container, which is like a medieval piece of instrument,
right,
is exactly the same as what we use in Catholic churches. So we call it the thurible. The thurible is a place where you put the incense, and it's exactly the same. And that just intrigued me. Like, where was the connection here between Tibetan Buddhism and Catholicism? There's that intersection, at least with the incense container. But anyway, Tibetan Buddhism reminds me so much of Catholicism.
Right. Was that a good thing or not, to connect with that? Or was that, by this time, did you have more something like you knew you wanted to go a different direction?
Yeah. So for me, there are all sorts of similarities. So one would be they have lots and lots of rituals. They also have deities, which for me is very confusing, which is very similar to Catholicism in that we have different saints,
right,
different patrons, and that you don't have to go direct to Jesus. You can if you want to, but you can also go. You might go faster if you go through Mary, because Mary's the mother of God. That's quicker sometimes to Jesus. But,
right.
but I have this similar feeling. It's not a bad feeling, but I actually just wanted something simpler.
Right.
Simpler and easy to understand that will connect with I'm a relatively simple thinker. I don't want complexity when it comes to living my life. So Tibetan Buddhism for me is exotic, interesting, beautiful. I owe a lot to the Dalai Lama, but it's just not connecting with me. And the connection I made with Theravadan Buddhism is very different. It was instantaneous connection when I first met a Theravadan monk for the first time. So he's our teacher here in Auckland.
Ah, okay. So, and that's where it happened, right? So, is there a story there?
Yeah, yeah. So what happened was, since I'm in the faculty of medicine in Auckland, and a lot of medical students become good friends of mine. A couple of young medical students, they were Sri Lankan New Zealanders, approached me and said, "You know, Tony, we need a faculty member to sign off for a room that they want to use. So they want to hold a session on managing stress and anxiety." And of course, they'll approach me because I'm one of the psychiatrists.
Right.
And I said, "Yep, this is great." But it will be run by a Buddhist monk.
What do you think of that?
I said, "That's kind of weird." Because I was thinking, stress and anxiety, that's a domain of psychiatrists and psychologists. But
right.
All right, let's see these Buddhist monks.
Sounds like you had some kind of, perhaps there was an opening already after having read the Dalai Lama to give it a chance rather than, right.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I should be very open to it, but actually, I was a little cynical.
Right.
Like, okay, let's see how good these monks are. Because I haven't met Theravada monks before.
Okay.
And I was thinking, I know the Buddhists know a lot about the mind, but I'm not sure if they really know a lot about anxiety and stress. That's my domain as well.
Right.
So they organized this meeting, and I walked into the hall, and before I saw the two Buddhist monks, I had this unusual, there's this wave of peace. It's hard to describe it in words, but I was like washed by this. It's like water of, I don't know how to say it, but I was like bathing in peace. Like it was a feeling of a palpable feeling of, wow, what's that? And then when I walked into the hall, then I saw these two monks sitting on the floor. They're just meditating before the session started.
Right.
I was thinking, oh my, this is weird. And then when the senior monk was talking, Ajahn Chandako, he's a Thai forest tradition monk. Gosh, everything he said just made sense to me about what stress is and what anxiety is and how we can manage. That's how I initially made connection with Thai forest monks. And after that session, we started to organize weekly meditation sessions in the medical school. So the monk will come every week, and then we would have students coming in. And it wasn't a huge affair, but interestingly, it is actually a nice twist. A couple of months ago, I visited the monastery, the Thai forest monastery.
Right.
And there's this Anagarika, a young monk, well, soon to be Anagarika.
Right.
He's 27 years old. He said, "Tony, you won't remember this, but it was one of the meditation sessions you organized where I got to learn about Buddhism."
Oh, wow.
And now he's an Anagarika. And I was almost in tears. Yeah, because we just don't know what the effects of the things we do.
Right.
So it's just one of those nice little moments recently. So I'm still quite involved with the Thai forest tradition here in Auckland.
Right. And so it sounds like it wasn't just one thing though, right? It was both this tactile experience of this wave of peace and also like as they spoke, it just made so much sense to you. So at a cognitive level and at a felt sense, it sounded like there was a real resonance with the Dhamma.
Yeah. It's hard to explain that one. In fact, that felt sense. The other time I had that felt sense was 2 or 3 times when I met the Dalai Lama.
Right.
Not very close, but even from a distance. But that might also be a placebo effect, because the Dalai Lama is famous and all the projections that I have about him on him. And when he just comes onto the stage,
Right.
I also had this feeling of peace.
Right.
But these two monks are not Dalai Lama monks.
Right.
They're not the Dalai Lama. They're just regular monks, but they had the same effect, which doesn't happen with all the monks I meet. All right, it's not an effect of the robe.
That's right. Right. I had the same experience with the Dalai Lama. When I met the Dalai Lama, it was just I can't remember what it's called. It's called an audience, but there's different kinds of audience.
Yeah.
This was just like thousands of people, and you just kind of go through and shake his hand or bow down or whatever you want to do. And so, yeah, I bowed down and shook his hand and then walked away. And I was kind of had this blissed out feeling for about 20 minutes. My friend was trying to talk to me, and he about halfway through what he was trying to say, he's like, you can't hear a word I'm saying. And I just kind of had this kind of spacey look on my face with a big smile. And I just shook my head and said, no, I can't. I could not follow what he was saying. I didn't really care either. But yeah, I know what you mean. I'm laughing also just because I do think, a lot of I would imagine a lot of our listeners have had some kind of experience like that, either arriving somewhere with their own practice or encountering someone that seems to resonate a strong, peaceful practice themselves.
It's hard to explain. And as a psychiatrist, I try to analyze it. Is it placebo or is it a real spiritual thing? I don't know. Very hard to separate it.
Right. No matter what it actually is, it does seem to serve as an encouragement or inducing some kind of enthusiasm for more. So was there more? What came after? Obviously there was more because you're still practicing. So yeah, well, I've heard that you pursued things. So maybe you could talk about where you went from there as far as your pursuits.
So for me, in terms of personal practice, initially, how would you say that? Because I'm just trying to reflect now. I read the book of the Dalai Lama in 2004, so I remember that.
Right.
And it was in 2004 when I also attended my first meditation course with the Buddhist Center, the Western Buddhist order.
Okay.
But probably for many years, my meditation practice was very irregular. A few times here and there, occasionally attending one-day retreat here and there. So
right.
The practice was very irregular. However, intellectually, I wouldn't say fully, because there are still bits of Buddhist doctrine that I'm not still fully in it. But the core teachings really resonate with me, even from the beginning. But my practice solidified. When I say solidified, became more regular, as in daily meditation practice, formally and informally.
Right.
I would say only the past 5 or 6 years, where it's just regular.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that made it very regular was after I ordained temporarily as a monk in Myanmar. I did it twice. I think 2017 and 2018, I think, when I did it. One was 2 weeks in outside Yangon, and the other 2 weeks was in Tabawa Center. That's when, after becoming a monk even briefly, I realized, hey, I can meditate for hours. And it doesn't have to be that painful. Like I enjoyed it. And since then, it's regular. Because if I can do 6-8 hours of meditation, I'm sure I can do 30 minutes at least every day, if not more now. So that's how it solidified. I think becoming a monk temporarily. Yeah.
Let's go into this a little bit. Tony, how do you get from, there's a bit missing here. Like you go from like experiencing these Theravada monks to like making what most people would consider a pretty big decision to like go ordain, even if it's temporarily. Like, where did you do that? Yeah, that was in Myanmar, right? And then
Yes.
how did that even come on the radar that you could do that? Like, where did you hear about that? That's a possibility.
Yeah.
And then what was so appealing about that you thought, yeah, I'm going to do that?
Yes. I actually cannot remember who told me. So someone told me that in Thailand and Myanmar, that it's common for men to ordain briefly.
Right.
And then I don't know who told me. I actually don't remember. And that in Myanmar, it's common for men to do it every year, every couple of years. It just interested me because deep inside,
Uh-huh.
part of me wants to become a Buddhist monk, like a full-fledged one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, even up to now.
Uh-huh.
So there's something that attracts me to it. And then I got in touch with Joa, I think.
Oh, okay.
I think he was the one who suggested that I contact this nun at Chiang Mai Mieng Monastery.
Right.
I think her name's Viranani. I think Viranani. She's an American nun,
Mm-hmm.
and she was so helpful. Just made it so easy. And I said, "Yep, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this at least for 2 weeks."
Right. So that's actually just down the road from where I ordained.
Oh, really? Where did you ordain?
With Seada Utejaniya, it's literally on the same road, like you get off the highway and then Chiang Mai Mieng is right there. And then if you go a little further, then you end up kind of where the road ends is it's literally like a 5-minute walk away from where I ordained.
Really? Yeah. Yeah, that was so special. In fact, during my 2 stints of brief ordinations, I actually cried at the end when I had to receive my layman's clothes again.
Uh-huh.
Just like, really? To go back to their but then again, I was only there for 2 weeks, so it's a honeymoon phase.
Right.
I know it's not that easy to be a monk long term.
Well, nonetheless, I think we spend 2 weeks doing things that don't have a very profound effect on us. It certainly wouldn't make us cry at the end, in that kind of way, being so touched.
Yeah.
So nonetheless, honeymoon or not, it does seem like something really touched you there.
Yeah.
And then it sounded like it shifted things. You said that's when your practice really became stable. So
yeah, very, very stable.
That's a metta practice, right? So
Yeah. I would say that the training was hard because I'm used to mindfulness practice,
right.
and I do occasional metta, like probably 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes max on occasion. I actually targeted that monastery because I'm not sure if it's Joa who told me or Viranani, the nun, told me that they do a lot of metta training there. And I forgot to mention, I'm also doing my PhD now here in Auckland University, and my topic is compassion in medicine.
Okay, great.
So I'm very interested in the whole field of compassion, not just as an emotional state, but also from a neuroscience perspective, also from a health perspective. So I was thinking, since I'm interested in this topic, this is my topic of research, I want to learn metta from a place that really teaches metta.
Uh-huh.
So I want to go to a place where compassion is taught. That's why I chose Chiang Mai Mieng.
Oh, okay.
Because of its compassion training. And I found it really hard doing metta training the whole day.
Right.
It was hard because it's very different from mindfulness. It was hard. But the teacher, I forgot his name now, was saying, just carry on. It gets easier after about a week. But my first week was really hard.
Uh-huh.
And after a week, it became easy. Like it became less effortful. Yeah, less effortful.
Right.
It was flowing. Whereas the first week,
Uh-huh.
It was very mechanical. Don't base it on feelings. Just carry on. The different stages of doing metta. But after 1 week, oh yeah, he's right. It's more fun. It's easier, but still quite different experience from not just doing, but from doing mindfulness of the breath or the body.
Right.
But one of the things I realized there was I can actually sit for a long time. Nothing like the monks there. They were sitting, oh my gosh, like some of them were not moving for a couple of hours.
Right.
And then here I am after about 1 hour, I'm already congratulating myself. It's like, yeah, the ego is there. Tony, you've done 1 hour. You can do a little bit of walking now.
A little reward for sitting. Right.
Yeah, when I calculated it, I was probably averaging 6 to 8 hours, which is nothing compared to what the monks were doing there. But 6 to 8 hours for me is like, oh, wow. Before, you're getting restless after 30 minutes. So it gave me the confidence that I can do it. I can do this regularly. And it's not painful all the time.
Right. I have a question for you, Tony.
Yeah.
What did your family and your like Filipino friends, especially the ones from back home, what did they think of you? Not only like being interested in mindfulness, but specifically in Buddhism, and especially in taking robes. That's a pretty big move. How did the people around you respond to that?
Yeah. So I I think those who did not agree were not brave enough to tell me in my face that they don't agree with it.
Okay.
But my family is quite a loving family, even though most of them are practicing Catholics at that time. Some of them are not anymore.
Right.
They were proud of me. They supported me. So they're very open-minded, my family. And
Okay.
a lot of my friends in New Zealand were really excited because they know that it's something I've always wanted to do. Yeah, actually, I don't remember encountering anyone negative or bitter, probably because they were worried that they're going to debate with me. I'm not a big debater, but I'm a relatively likable person, so probably no one just wanted to annoy me or something. Yeah, never encountered resistance.
Okay.
A few, interestingly, because sometimes I give lectures, and when I'm giving talks on resilience and managing the mind, I talk about mindfulness, I talk about enhancing compassion in a secular way. And then I'll actually show a picture of me as a monk.
Right.
And then some people are like stunned.
Uh-huh.
And then a few people actually approach me after and will ask me, Tony, I also wanted to do the same thing. So I give them contacts.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So interestingly, people come out of the woodwork and say, I'm so happy for you. You've done it. I've always wondered about doing it myself. And they'll talk to me. And I demystify it.
Uh-huh.
It's not it's nothing different from, of course, there's qualitative difference from other types of training systems, but I view it as it's a training system.
Right.
It's different, of course. People look exotic. They're wearing robes.
Right.
But it's a training system. It's not faith-based.
Absolutely.
So far, and I haven't encountered anyone treating me badly or negatively because I became a monk. I think it also adds a little bit of credibility when I talk about compassion training and mindfulness. I'm not just someone who learned it from a 6-week course,
right?
But I learned it from different types of teachers, and a lot of them I call them Jedis. The Ajahn Chah monks, I call them Jedis.
Right. Yeah, and so when you came back to New Zealand, you got more involved with the Thai forest tradition. Is that right?
Yeah. So now in New Zealand, I've been involved on and off with the Thai forest tradition for about 10 or so years. We don't have a big presence of Burmese monks here. There's one temple here in Auckland, not far from where I live, and I visited them a few times. I felt really at home. I feel like it's like it looks the same as a temple in Myanmar. Even the color, they like green.
Right.
I don't know what's this thing about green walls, but they have green walls as well. And they have this big Buddha statues with LED lights. Right. It's a very Burmese thing.
Yes.
The problem is a lot of the Burmese monks here, their English isn't very good.
Right.
And they cater mainly to the local Burmese community.
Right.
So the relationship is very superficial compared to the Thai forest monks who all speak English.
Because of the language barrier, right?
I think the language is important.
Right.
Yeah. But I've been in touch with the Thai forest monks at least for 10, 15 years. But the relationship was stronger after becoming a Buddhist monk in Myanmar.
Right. And so your practice became steady and the benefits became, must have come up more and more. And then as I understand it, you actually started incorporating you've mentioned this before, a lot of the benefits, trying to make it a bit more secular and then actually bring them into your work. So maybe you've talked a little bit about that, but perhaps you could say more about what you're doing on that front.
Yeah, so a lot of people I see have sleep difficulties. Many of them have problematic anxieties, depressions. Many of them are really hard on themselves, like pathological levels of self hatred and perfectionism. And then I talk about different interventions. There's traditional Western approaches, different types of psychotherapy. But I also talk about the importance of knowing how the mind works. And one of the best ways to do that is doing mindfulness practice. And I talk a lot about kindness to self and kindness to others. It's interesting, in Western psychology, the concept of being kind to others and showing compassion is rarely talked about. But from experience, it's interesting.
Yeah, interesting, huh?
But from experience, I remember I had this patient, very difficult to treat depression. So nothing's worked. Like we've used all types of treatments, all types of medications, all types of psychotherapies. Nothing's working. And then I ask her, nothing seems to be working, but have you thought of doing volunteer work in the city mission for the homeless? Because I was thinking, stop thinking about how miserable your life is. See if you can do some good to others.
Right.
And that was her best treatment. She changed.
Right.
So I tend to talk about the importance of focusing on other people, other beings, because at least you're not that focused on your own problems, but you will benefit as well. So
Right.
a lot of this is actually Buddhist inspired psychology. And I incorporate that a lot in my clinical practice.
Right. Like before, there was someone else teaching it and you were just seeing the effects. Do you just suggest to them that they engage in it somehow and give them resources, or do you actually guide them in mindfulness, or how does that play out in treatment?
So most of the time, I would direct them to different resources. I also gauge how open they are to it.
Right.
Because some people will say, nah, Tony, I'm not into that. Okay. You move on. But I would say 95% are open. And then I'll direct them to different types of resources. I'll tell them there are different ways to learn it. First, the easiest at the moment is to download apps. And I mentioned a couple of popular apps. And I told them, but you can only learn so much from apps.
Right.
And that there are incredible books. There are secular books. There are books written by Buddhist masters. And then there are YouTube guided meditations by secular people and also Buddhist masters. And then there are secular courses, like 6-8 week courses. But if you're interested, there are also those taught by Buddhist teachers.
Right.
So I give them a range.
Like a Dhamma buffet.
Yeah, and I let them decide. And my attitude, the reason why I prefer that attitude versus just telling them this is the best way to do it is looking at my own experience. I actually tried the different samples and found one which resonated with me the most, versus I think it would not have worked if I just stuck with one group. And I like trying different places. So most of my patients agree that mindfulness works, helps with insomnia or anxiety. a few really pursue it. I have a few people who have gone to monasteries
Right.
and have done vipassana courses. So that's a small group, but majority would learn it from apps or books because they just want symptom relief.
Right.
At the very least, if you do a little bit of mindfulness practice here and there, you feel a little better. And I had to tell them, but I want you to know that that's not how it was originally taught.
Right. Right.
I tell them, well, when mindfulness was, I have to put a disclaimer, I'm not an expert in Buddhism, but when mindfulness was taught by the Buddha, it was in a context of living an ethical life.
Right.
I talk about the importance of kindness,
Uh-huh.
and I talk about a little bit about the Four Noble Truths once in a while.
Right.
That it's not just mindfulness. Mindfulness is part of 8 steps. I talk about the Eightfold Path briefly. But yeah, some people don't want to hear that bit. They just want to see mindfulness as symptom relief. However, with some, you can sense, well, there's more to this. Let's talk more about this, Tony.
Right.
So I have a few patients, not a lot, who specifically wanted me to teach them.
Uh-huh.
Especially, I remember I have this patient who, she said, Tony, I've been to so many meditation teachers, different types of traditions, and they just say, I'm hopeless. That her mind is super busy.
Oh.
That nothing can be done. and then she said, can you teach me? So we sat down, and I actually had her record my guided meditation, which is where there was a lot of kindness.
Mm-hmm.
But it's okay to be distracted. It's normal.
Right.
And then she said, oh, it's the first time I'm able to pay attention relatively consistently.
All right.
And I said, well, I think it's the approach of a busy mind is a normal mind.
Yes.
The goal is not to obliterate thought.
Right.
Thinking is good.
Right. Right.
But right now we're doing attention training, and every time you get distracted, it's perfectly normal. You notice and gently, kindly go back to the breath. And I told her that's one of the most important instructions.
Right.
That it's normal. We have a busy mind. We notice.
Right.
And we bring it back kindly.
Right.
Underline kindly.
Yes.
It's perfectly normal to have a crazy mind.
It's natural and normal to think. And I think we need to understand what role thinking can play that helps us versus the type of thinking that harms us, and knowing the difference, because we're not trying to kill it. We're just trying to understand what's the type of thinking and what are the conditions that arise to thinking that's harmful versus what's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. So I talk about, for some who you can sense are receptive.
Right.
I talk about papancha.
Right.
Thought proliferation, and that can be a cause of so much suffering. And they say, oh, how can I manage it? How can I manage it? I think you need to be aware of your thinking. So we go back to, you need to look at mindfulness training. And then I direct them to some talks. So Ajahn Amaro has a few talks on managing the crazy mind.
Right.
So I'll send them links to some of his podcasts on. So Ajahn Amaro is also a Thai forest teacher. He's an abbot in Amaravati in London. I think he's one of the best people when it comes to explaining ruminative and a busy mind, because he has it himself.
Right.
So again, normalizing a lot of these things.
Right. He's an expert on it.
On rumination. He's a papancha expert.
Right. By experience. Right. So I have a question for you. As far as I understand it, you're one of the most prominent sleep specialists in the world, and here you are incorporating mindfulness into your actual treatment. Is it taking root anywhere in the field of psychiatry and sleep therapy or whatever? Whatever your field is. Are other doctors becoming interested?
It is actually. In fact, medicine is quite open to the concept of mindfulness, and I think because of a few reasons. John Kabat-Zinn, who started the research on mindfulness in chronic pain.
Right.
And he started MBSR, which is mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is now a worldwide
Right.
phenomenon,
Right. Right.
doing 8-week, it's an 8-week session. So John Kabat-Zinn, I think, influenced the medical community to look into mindfulness seriously.
Is that because he did actual research, like so he could
Yes.
kind of statistically
Yep.
show and clinically show that
Yeah,
there were
yeah.
real results?
Yep.
Right. Right.
Yes. So he was the first, I think, in Western medicine to study mindfulness scientifically
Right.
with good standards of research. So when you talk about that to doctors can understand it.
Right.
Like, oh, okay.
Right.
So there's some basis.
Contextualize. Right.
Yeah. And then a lot of doctors suffer from burnout.
Right.
At least
right.
50% of senior doctors in the US or in the Western world are burnt out. And we're always looking at ways to manage burnout in doctors. And there are a few research papers showing that doing mindfulness training
Good for the doctor.
helps with burnout.
Right.
Yep. So there are a few research areas which show that it's helpful in terms of resilience, particularly of doctors and healthcare practitioners.
Uh-huh.
And then mindfulness is now used in different medical conditions. So if you go to chronic pain clinics, mindfulness is commonly part of the treatment.
Oh, okay.
In anxiety clinics, mindfulness is taught. And in sleep, mindfulness is now considered an important treatment for insomnia.
Oh, okay.
So for people who have poor quality sleep, learning to accept, that you have this condition instead of ruminating on it.
Right.
Because you can have insomnia. For example, you have insomnia, poor quality sleep once in a while. It already causes suffering. It's already the first arrow of suffering.
Right,
You have
right.
insomnia.
And worrying about it.
A lot of worrying about it is the second arrow.
Yes.
It worsens it.
Right.
So learning to notice that you're adding to your own suffering has been shown to be helpful.
Yeah,
It lessens
sure.
the suffering.
Right.
It lessens the insomnia. It lessens chronic pain. In fact, with my patients, I talk about the 2 arrows.
Oh, great. From one of the suttas.
Yeah. And I tell them, all of us, we don't have a choice of the first arrow. All of us will encounter suffering, dissatisfaction, illness, aging, traffic, annoying in-laws, stomach aches.
Right.
You don't have a choice.
Right.
However, we can make it much worse because of the mind.
Right.
And that's when I talk about the second arrow. And people get it. I don't even have to say it's from the Buddha, but most of the time I insert the name Buddha. I hope you don't mind, all right?
Just to give the credits, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not converting you to anything. In fact, people do not convert to Buddhism, but it's the Buddha who came up with this.
Right.
And then they'll say, wow, really? So it makes it interesting for me because I'm not a monk, but I think I do little bits of Dhamma teaching in the clinics.
Right, right.
Using a lot of the practical tips on managing the mind.
Well, speaking of being a monk, you said there's been an inclination to be a monk. Do you ever think about going back to robes at any time?
Yes. But it's complicated. I have a partner.
All right.
And that makes it more complicated. So probably doing a temporary ordination would be a longer one would be more acceptable, and then see what happens. In fact, right now, I'm talking to you on my computer, but I have my little shrine in front of me, and I still use my robes, my old robes, so they allowed me to bring it home. It's like the tablecloth of my shrine is my old sitting robe. What do you call it? What's the square one?
The sitting cloth?
Yeah, the sitting cloth. So
Right.
The sitting cloth is where my Buddha statue is sitting.
So Buddha's sitting on your sitting cloth. Oh, sadhu.
I still have my robes.
Uh-huh.
And once in a while, I still smell him.
Right, right. Yeah, I think about it as well in the future. So perhaps someday we'll be in robes again. And if not, we just kind of keep plugging along and
Yeah.
growing as we can.
Yeah. It's still always in my mind. So it's never been extinguished. Yeah. Probably the older I get, the more I want to do it.
Great. Hope you get a chance.
I have some friends who tell me, Tony, yeah, it will be nice if you're a Buddhist monk, but you can actually do more good things as a layperson. But of course, I don't go into the discussion of, no, I disagree with you.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's hard to, because they view the world in,
Yes.
Service
Practical
as
terms.
the most important thing. Yeah. You can teach more people about these things if you're a layperson, but if you're a Buddhist monk, I will have less reach and less access to people who will never be close to Buddhism in the outside world. But I just keep quiet.
Well, I mean, they are correct in that sense. You are, as a layperson, having that effect on people, and I think that's a wonderful thing. You're bringing an opportunity for it without trying to convert people, just like making the benefits of awareness available to people, and if people are more interested, kind of like saying, hey, this is where it comes from. If you're interested, there's even more down this same road. So that's beautiful.
Yeah. The most exciting the most exciting thing for me actually in my whole life. So if I were to die soon and I were to rate, the highlights of my life, becoming a monk would be up there. And also my alms rounds with my, alms rounds in poor areas of outside Yangon where people are so poor but they're so happy to give me food. I was actually in tears.
Right.
But one other highlight was when I started to teach mindfulness in prison.
Oh, right.
That for me is the highest of my different highlights. And it's incredible how inmates will just take to it.
Right.
And practice it. And then the following week or a few weeks later, they'll tell me in a hushed voice because they don't want to share it to everyone. They'll just talk to me and say, Tony, you gave me that instruction on breathing because I give them a sheet of paper because they're not allowed computers. They're
Right.
not allowed a lot of things.
Old school.
Yeah, old school. And then I remember this inmate saying he posted my instructions on his wall in his cell and he's practicing regularly. And with his mindfulness of the breath practice, his panic attacks went away.
Wow.
Because every time the doors in the prison slam, they're really loud.
Yes.
And it can happen hundreds of times during the day. And every time it will slam, he will have a panic attack.
Wow.
And with mindfulness, his panic attack went away. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, it's already worth it. Even just for this one person.
Absolutely.
Doing very basic mindfulness of the breath and mindfulness of emotions, mindfulness of thoughts, how it can be so transformative to people who are suffering. So for me, that's one of the highlights ever of my mindfulness practice is sharing it with prisoners and them really taking on to it.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
I'm looking forward to starting the sessions again with inmates in a couple of weeks because I was away for about a year.
All right.
And now I want to do more in the prison system because these are people who will not encounter much Dhamma at all.
Right. It'd be what we would call an underserved population of people that are very,
very, very, very underserved.
but very open. Not that every single one's going to be open to it, but at that point, there's a lot of self-reflection in a lot of them, and I mean, not always, right? You can get caught up in commiserating as well, victimization or whatever it can be, but there will be a percentage of them that are, really perhaps quite open to it. So that's great. Great to hear that.
Surprisingly, I was expecting, in a unit of 50 men,
Uh-huh.
I was already preparing myself. If no one attends my session, at least I'll meditate in the prison.
Right.
But if there's one or two, I'll be very happy.
Uh-huh.
And you're talking about 50 men. So if one or two come, I'll be happy.
Right.
But normally 10 to 15
Uh-huh.
guys will show up regularly.
Okay.
And for me, that's not a bad statistic. 10 to 15, that's about 30%.
That's right. 20 to 30%. Exactly.
Yep. And these are people who want to attend basic mindfulness session. So anyway, I can hear the background noise, some work going on there.
It's actually some kind of insect. I live in the jungle, so there's all these like
Oh,
really,
really?
yeah,
Is that an
just some
insect?
sort of,
Wow.
yeah, it's like some kind of cricket, something rubbing its legs together in a cricket kind of way.
Oh,
But yeah, they're
wow.
really, it's a really loud one. But here we have two different kinds of geckos that make noises. We have dogs and a rooster and these frogs that, especially when it rains, make a lot of noise. And then these kind of all different kinds of cricket and cicada type insects that fill up the space of sound.
That's incredible. I thought it was an electric saw or something.
Yeah, it's kind of what it sounds like. But yeah, and now it's gone totally quiet. So, you
Yeah.
just never know. But so, yeah, my podcasts are filled with all kinds of funny sounds. Sometimes there's just certain sounds I can't prevent. So they just got to be there. It's part of life.
Yeah.
Anyways, great. That was fun, Tony. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Zach. I hope that was helpful. Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Zach. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of Insight Myanmar.
Hey, you're welcome. Tell me a little bit. Are you in Manila right now? I understand. Is that right?
Actually, I live in Laguna. It's about 45 minutes south of Manila.
So tell me a little bit about that. Like, what's your life like? I know a few things about you, but it'd be interesting for our listeners to hear.
Yeah, I actually am just on lockdown right now. And just like most people in the world, it's some very interesting times that we're living in. And the past few months have been really interesting because there's been a lot of changes. In the beginning, I was teaching on a daily basis. I was doing live meditations. And then I was kind of blocked by Facebook from doing that. And so I kind of stopped for a little while. And now what I'm seeing is a lot more movement in the mindfulness field where I'm doing a lot more work internationally. So apart from the offerings that we do with Philippine Insight Meditation Community, there's also work that I am doing with Mindful Leader, and that's a daily meditation that I do. And there's also some personal classes that I teach daily with mindful movement. So we're really integrating a lot of more embodiment practices to connect us with our body and the meditation practice. And apart from that, Zach, I'm also a mother, and, there's also a lot of other aspects in life. I love to be outside and garden and, go and get some fresh air and some sunshine and do things that will help really sustain me during these times.
Right. So yeah, these are interesting times. So you're a mindfulness teacher, and are you teaching more online these days?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I haven't really seen any other opportunities to teach in person. So the technology has been something that I needed to work with and learn more about. And I'm thankful for Zoom. And I'm also seeing that even the online platform is a great way to connect with people. And there's bridges that are being built, across oceans and continents in a way that I have never experienced before. Before, when I would teach in the United States, of course, I would have to fly there. And, it really depended on me being there in person. But now there's so many invitations for me to be a part of teaching in UCLA, for example, or places like the Insight centers in California. So it just feels a lot more connected. Yet at the same time, we're here, we're at home, and still building these connections and cultivating relationships.
What I find interesting about the Philippines is one of the few Asian countries that wasn't really touched by Buddhism, by the Dhamma. And so I'd like to explore that a little bit, being a predominantly Catholic society, if we could go back a little bit in time, and if you wouldn't mind sharing about how you were brought up in terms of the Filipino culture, and then what your first kind of contact or inclination towards these spiritual practices. I mean, you not only practice and teach mindfulness, but you're also a yoga teacher, right? So I'm interested in hearing where all that, like what it was like in your culture, because this is sort of an anomaly. And then, yeah, what were those first touches with an interest in the Dhamma and spirituality?
Yeah, so I was born here. I was born in Manila, and I was actually a pretty religious kid. It's funny because I was reflecting on that last night. There were a couple of years in my life as a young child, between 8 and 10 years old, where I would walk to church almost on a daily basis and pray to Jesus for money, for, for certain things. And when I was 11, I moved to the US, and things really shifted a lot for me. It's a lot of adjusting to different culture and the way of life. So the religion really fell away pretty quickly. And then especially becoming a teenager, I just ended up becoming more of a rebel than anything else. And through the rebellion, I suppose, I started to get more connected to more spiritual side of myself rather than the religious side. And that's because I started to go to Grateful Dead concerts. And this is when I started to feel and sense the connection with people, and things that, really just opened my mind up a lot. I started to question a lot more about religion and so many other things in life that I was taught. And
right. I'm laughing because I was also a Deadhead for about 15 years, starting in about the mid 80s.
Right. I started going to Dead shows in 1990, when just before Brent Midland died.
Right.
Yeah.
So does any of that opening up towards spirituality, did that include any of the what they call mind expanding psychedelic experience of LSD or mushrooms or any of that?
Absolutely.
It did for me. So
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. So that actually, it's my doors of perception were completely blasted open. And and so it was when I was 16, actually, I was just kind of rummaging through things in my house, and I saw a book, and it was about transcendental meditation. And that's when I experimented a little bit. And mind you, my teenage years and my early 20s, I was completely immersed in the Grateful Dead scene that I did not even remember that I was still meditating up into my early 20s. one of my friends reminded me that she and I were roommates or flatmates in Oakland, and she'd say, I'd have to wait outside your room till you were done meditating. And I was like, really? Oh, okay. So it was something that I took up, but not seriously, and it wasn't enough for me to actually remember.
Right.
Now that I'm 46. But then what happened was, when I was 24, I ended up coming back to the Philippines, not by choice, but because I had been deported. And that deportation process actually started when I was 16. And so that's 16 was a great milestone for me, because it was that suffering and that confusion in my life, and also being a teenager combined with the expansion and the mind opening, and that really brought me in more into the spirituality.
Right.
So in my early 20s, I ended up coming back to the Philippines.
Yeah. What was that like? How did that culture interact with your rebellious side, or this kind of budding spirituality? I'm interested into, like, did you find connection there, or was there a bit of a rub or a friction, or like, how did that go?
Oh, it just kind of put my fire out, really. I mean, it was difficult for me. It was 10 years of absolute being lost. I didn't know anybody here so much, so that I just didn't know where to place myself. And I was an individual in the US, where then I was thrown back here to the Philippines, where everyone seemed to be conformist. Everyone dressed the same and talked the same and wanted to be the same. And so I had to really douse out that fire for me to feel like I had a place here, that I
Right.
have a sense of belonging somehow, so that I could be safe. But that sense of adventure was still very much there. And so I ended up moving to the beach and working there. But, then because I was lost for so long, for those 10 years, I was traveling a bit. But ever since I was 16, I remember there was a voice in the back of my head telling me that you need to find Buddhism. But I didn't know what Buddhism was, because all I knew was Catholicism.
Right.
And nor did I have that presence of mind, to look up what Buddhism was. It was just there, And eventually, after having been back here in the Philippines for a few years, I ended up meeting someone who is from Thailand, but she lives here still. She became one of my best friends, and I ended up working for Philippine Diver magazine. And then they wanted to start Thai Diver magazine, so they sent me over to Thailand. And that's when I thought, because traveling with my Thai best friend, that I might find Buddhism, going from one temple to the next, and doing all of those rituals and shaking those sticks out of that cup, and ringing the bells and putting coins in the bowls. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll find Buddhism. And it just never felt like I connected with anything. And
Right.
eventually I ended up going to India and staying in the ashram. One of my roommates had just finished a 10-day silent meditation retreat. And she was so mean to me.
Really?
She really was directing like fire arrows at me all the time, because it felt like I had finally met my people, because being here in the Philippines and feeling like I just couldn't find my crew. I didn't, was still trying to make my way and like feel a sense of belonging here. And then finally I go to India, where there's people from all over the world here in this ashram, and we're doing yoga. I was just like, oh my God, finally I made it.
Right.
And it's funny, because on the way to my ashram from Mumbai, one of the students that ended up on the same train as me going there was wearing a Grateful Dead t-shirt. I was like, oh my God, there it is. So
That seems to happen in India a lot. I mean, I have a big India history too, and there's so much serendipity and unfolding, and a sense of a sense of coming home to a lot of people. I find that interesting.
It's one of those places. It's it's either you really hate or you really love and feel at home in India. And I'm definitely one of those who feel that that's my second home. So,
do you have a natural ease in being able to do the head wobble?
No, I haven't gotten that one down yet.
I feel the same way. It divides people. You either love it or you can't wait to get out, But as my friend said, Mother India, she she kisses and she slaps, but it's
Right.
always with love. But it's just this great, yeah. It's just like
Oh,
that
I
for so
love
many
that.
people.
I love that. That's a nice mother, she'll put you in your place, but in a loving way.
I've had both. Yeah, right.
But yeah, just going back to now this, experience in the ashram where there was this woman who had just finished a silent 10-day meditation retreat. And she was so upset with me because I was so bubbly and happy. And I was like, wow, And there were sometimes also that people would come to our room, and if I was doing my laundry in the bathroom, which was outside of our actual dorm room, and they would come and talk to me because I was so friendly. And I mean, nobody knew she was trying to meditate in her little bedroom where there were curtains around. And so that's why she hated me,
Right.
because apparently during her meditations, she was unable to concentrate because people were coming to talk to me. So one day I said to one of my friends from Iran, I was like, hey, if that's what meditation does to you, I'll never meditate.
Right.
And then that's when she said, no, Amy, it's such a beautiful experience. And I did it before, and I stayed in my room and I cried my eyes out for 3 days and never went out of my room. You should try it. And I was like, oh, okay. And and I say this, and I don't actually even consider the fact that I had been meditating within the Mahayana tradition for years before I ran into this Theravada tradition.
Right.
And, because the practice that I was doing was chanting. And it never really occurred to me that the practice of chanting was already helping me to see more clearly into my mind and the kind of thoughts that were arising and passing, and then realizing, oh my gosh, I thought I was a positive and happy person. And then seeing the thoughts in my mind made me really step back and go, hold on a minute. I'm not who I think I am.
Huh. Oh, great.
So, that was my real introduction to really committing to a practice, was through the chanting in the Mahayana tradition. And then in India, finding out about this 10-day silent retreat. And so when I came back here to the Philippines, I looked it up and I found a retreat, and I was on the wait list for a while, but then they eventually said, oh no, we can't turn people away. So they allowed everyone to come. And my only challenge to myself, and the reason why I was interested to join, was I wanted to know, can I not speak for 10 days straight? I was like, am I capable of that?
The Noble Silence Challenge, right?
Right. So, I mean, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And that was really just me like, okay, am I able to not talk?
Just to be clear, this is a Goenka retreat? Is that right?
Yes. This was my first retreat ever. And yeah, so, you go into the retreat with that kind of attitude, and, your only goal is to see if you can keep your mouth shut. And, and then you go into a Goenka retreat and you're like, oh my God, my body's killing me. And, my legs on fire, and I just want to do my yoga and they won't let me do my stretching. So it was a huge wake up call, but it was life changing. And that was the time when I said to myself, I found it. I found this practice that I'm looking for. I found.
What year was this?
This was in 2009.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's when, this voice in my head at 16 saying, look, you're looking, look for Buddhism or find Buddhism. And then it wasn't until 2009 when I thought, this is what I'm looking for, And it's funny because Goenka tradition is also trying to be more secular than outright Buddhist, right? And that they have been explicit in saying that you don't have to change your religion, you don't have to become Buddhist.
Right.
So I ended up finding home in the practice of vipassana, and in whatever way that you might translate that. Okay, and so I was really dedicated. I was a dedicated practitioner. for a good couple of years. I was volunteering and serving a lot. In fact, when I was pregnant, 7 months pregnant, I was serving with my son inside my womb. And I was convinced by the assistant teacher that I should actually sit rather than serve during the retreat. And my son ended up being the second Dhamma child, is what they call them, because there was another pregnant woman before me that sat a retreat. So my son, whom I call Quinn, for Quinn the Eskimo,
Grateful Dead reference.
Yes, absolutely. So he's the second Dhamma baby in the Philippines.
That song's actually from another band, though.
Yes, Manfred Mann.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's a cover song by the Grateful Dead. Anyways, so I was a very active community member, I guess what you would call, in the Goenka tradition. And what happened was, eventually, after having had some pretty mind-blowing experiences during my retreats, I had questions that couldn't be answered in that space. And I explored and I expanded a little bit more outside of the Goenka tradition. And eventually, when they found out that I was exploring other things, then they said that was not going to fly.
Right.
So I eventually got banned from coming to retreat. And that's how my journey ended up really opening up into practicing with other people, other traditions. And that is how Philippine Insight became what it is right now. So Philippine Insight Meditation Community was born out of three people who, we're three co-founders who just had a profound love for the Dhamma. And we just wanted to practice together in a place that was kind and gentle.
Right.
And incorporating compassion and, and still like being very sincere in our practice, and also being able to show up in all the different versions of who we are and still be met. We can meet each other exactly where we're at that moment. And that's what Philippine Insight Meditation Community is about.
Right.
Yeah, so we're a Theravada tradition as well. And how did we end up becoming this organization? Is that your question?
It's interesting, like in that sea of Catholicism, and then not being, you could say the Goenka traditions, it's established there. They have a center and everything. So, and then being outside of that now in the Philippines, how did you meet these other two?
Oh, it's funny because there's this woman who is the most incredible person that I know. She was in Palawan on one of the islands, and I ended up going there. She was in a retreat center, which was it's a raw food center.
Right.
Not necessarily meditation. And that's where I went. So we met there, and I had just done my second Goenka retreat, and I was super fundamentalist. I was like, Goenka, 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 it's the pure thing, And there she is. She's like, oh yeah, my mentor is Jack Cornfield, and I'm right now training with Spirit Rock as a community Dhamma leader. And I was like, who's Jack Cornfield? And no, I don't want to hear it. I'm like, Goenka, 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 But she and I sat together for about 8 hours at that table, and we just did nothing but talk about the Dhamma and really built a connection through that. But there I was in my own path, and there she is in this gentle, loving, and kind path. And here I am going, we're the only pure ones, right? And this was before I was banned, actually. Like, not long after that meeting, I was banned by the Goenka tradition, the organization. And then I found myself, like, again, in this place where I'm alone. I have no community. What am I going to do? So I messaged Carol, I emailed her, and I said, when are you going to start holding community sits? Because I really need a community. And that's coincidentally, it was around the same time as another friend who was so interested in what she was about, because she was with Spirit Rock. She's the student of Jack Kornfield. So they were having their own separate conversation. And eventually what happened was they decided that they were going to do a book study. And they messaged me and asked me if I could bring a group together. And I did. And we started off with 10 people just coming together on a weekly basis, studying. It was actually one of Jack Kornfield's books. And that's how Philippine Insight came about, with the encouragement of Jack Kornfield himself, because Carol was going, back and forth between the Philippines and San Francisco at that time while she was still training at Spirit Rock. And Jack was like, yeah, start it, go. And that's the reason why we call ourselves Insight Community, because we're still a part of that Insight community in the U.S.
Okay. She's the one you met in Palawan, and where does she live? Does she live in Manila? Is that like you guys physically meet, or is it more an online thing, or a combination? Is it all throughout the Philippines, or is it more like just like physically based somewhere?
Carol right now is in San Francisco. She has since moved back to the U.S. She's not Filipina. She's an American.
Okay.
And she just is actually, next week, she's graduating from the formal teacher training of Spirit Rock. So she's now one of the main teachers, the new fresh blood of teachers of Spirit Rock. And what's beautiful about Carol is that she braids indigenous work into her teachings, into her Dharma teaching.
Right.
She's half Native American. And so, she's integrating a lot of the earth-based practices with the teachings themselves. So she's in San Francisco, and then the other co-founder, Robin Velasco, is in Manila, and so we're both here in the Philippines, where he's actually a psychologist now, so he's doing a lot of therapy work with people, whereas I'm the one that's really managing and am now the guiding and leading teacher of Philippine Insight.
Right. Do you have a physical place, or do you rent, or how does that organize?
Well, right now we're doing everything online. So we don't have an actual physical space. We used to when we first started, because Carol had a wellness center, Templa Wellness Center in the city. So we had an actual physical space. And up until recently, we were also partnering with yoga studios that would allow us to come and hold space.
Oh, right,
there.
right.
So it had never really been an issue, because people really believed in what we were doing, and they were generous enough to allow for us to come there and continue to build our community. The thing is, Zach, here in the Philippines, it's not that easy to build community, because, as you said, we are a very prominently Catholic country. So we started in 2011, and I feel like I am still in the process of really getting it moving. It looks like it's finally moving. The wheel of the Dhamma is slowly turning, and there's already some momentum going. And
where have I heard that before?
So it's going to definitely take a lot more patience and commitment, and hopefully it's just going to keep growing bigger and bigger.
Right. That's exactly what I was interested in asking, is like, what is the interest like there? There is that landing place for people in the Goenka organization. And now it sounds like it's actually expanding to have more, what's the word, variety or possibilities of ways to practice and enter, or different things to try. So what is it you teach there? Like, do you teach a specific technique, or you say you like Anapana? So I'm interested in what you offer there to people, and what the level of interest is in Filipino people.
Yeah, so there are very few people that I know, at least within my immediate circle, that have an incredible interest in the Buddhist teachings. most people that I see coming into these spaces are more interested in the meditation itself rather than the sutta studies, for example, or the Dhamma. And because they're wanting to decompress, or maybe they're trying to find ways to come to a better place and let go of the suffering that they're feeling or the stress that they're experiencing. So what has happened in the evolution of me becoming, firstly, certified as a community Dharma leader at Spirit Rock, and me still trying to bring forward Buddhist teachings through Philippine insight, what I have had to do was then get trained at UCLA to speak the more secular way to bring this practice to people. And that's kind of like just what naturally came up for me, is what I thought I needed to do to bring the practice to a wider population of people who would otherwise not walk in through the Buddhist door.
Right.
So as Philippine Insight Meditation Community, the way that we do it is that we meditate for 45 minutes. So we're still applying the format as what you would find in Spirit Rock or any of the insight meditation centers in the West. So it's a 45-minute practice, and usually I'm guiding it. And what we anchor on is the breath. Of course, bringing into the play of awareness of our body and keeping it really very simple to begin with. And then we do a Dharma talk. And we apply at least, you bring in a little bit of the suttas, and depending also on who we're speaking to, right? So, for example, on Sunday, we're going to be offering mindful self-compassion practices more in a secular way of teaching it. And whereas in our last teaching, we talked about the Brahma Viharas.
Okay.
And so when I teach, because we're online, I can bring Carol in and I can bring other teachers in. But for me, my approach to teaching is always really incorporating a lot of the voice of my personal teacher, Thanissaro Bhikkhu. Like one time I taught at Insight LA, and I was teaching about climate change. And I asked him for advice too. I was like, how do I teach this? He's like, there are no teachings about climate change in the suttas. But he did give me advice, he gave me the metaphor of the mountain, and so it's great to have access to somebody who's so well versed in the suttas and still guiding me in that way, because of course, I really want to stay true to the teachings as best as I can.
Right. At the same time.
And yet at the same time, be able to meet people where they're at and how ready are they for this. That's how we are navigating. And it's it's like you're always trying to figure things out every moment, because you'll never know who's going to show up. Right. So it's always an adjustment.
Right. So you also teach yoga, right? So a lot of people are interested in yoga more for fitness and exercise and body health. And then you're also saying people are interested in at least a secular version of mindfulness. So that all sounds like a good progress. I mean, in the sense of meeting people where they're at. Perhaps you can say something about that. Like, what's the interest in yoga in the Philippines like? And is that kind of a gateway to mindfulness? Do you see some of those people wanting to take it a little bit further? Do you see that kind of trajectory in the interest?
I'm starting to see that more and more these days. But when I first started teaching yoga here in the Philippines in 2009, people would come in and ask me, do I have to change my religion to practice yoga?
Right.
So, and there was that understanding in that way. And there were still very few yoga teachers in 2009, but now there's a lot. And we have had so many different iterations and variations of yoga studios. But unfortunately, during these COVID times, a lot of them had also shut down.
Right.
So, yes. And the thing is the more mature yoga practitioners are now more and more heading toward the meditative practices.
Great.
But in the beginning, definitely people were coming in because they wanted to become more sexy or because they wanted to become more flexible.
Right.
And the thing is that it's not a problem, that is that gateway where, no matter what your reason is for coming in to the practice, whether it be yoga or meditation, if you end up studying with a good teacher, eventually you're going to meet that path where it leads
That's
you
right.
to, yes, happiness, or becoming more connected with your internal and the external, and the interactive play of that. And you'll notice some incredible changes and profound changes in your life. So it doesn't matter your reason for going in, but I think it's important that you end up finding the right teacher who's going to get you to to the place where it feels like it's meeting you, wherever and whenever you're ready.
Right.
For these teachings.
It's like the teacher, if you just taught fitness yoga, then that would be as far as it goes. And then doing more than that, like teaching mindfulness or even beyond that, it's not something that needs to be pushed, but just the fact that it's available. And then if you're, if there's an interest in what you're giving, then over time, those that want to go, that direction and as far as they want to go, that you hold that space and make that available. I think that's great.
Yeah. And I think, one of the most important things as a teacher is that I stay true to who I am. I have always been very dedicated to traditional yoga practice.
Right.
I have not veered away and start teaching, let's say, Bikram or universal yoga or goat yoga, just because that's where the interest is. Yes. Have you not heard of that?
Okay. I think I have heard of it. Yeah. I did. Is that a real thing? I thought
where you practice and there's goats in the room. Or there's even high heel yoga, right?
Uh-huh.
So and that's always evolving, but I have always stayed true to the traditional teachings of yoga practice because I know that is supposed to lead me to meditation. The 8 limbs of yoga is all about moving toward the last 4 limbs, which is the going more internally. The pratyahara, and then going toward the contemplation. Yeah. So it's really all about the meditation, and also the evolution and the progression, or people might even consider it regression of my practice, is that the asana or the postures or this physical practice became less and less important to me. And my formal meditation practice, or the integration of my meditation practice into my life, became more and more important and a priority for myself.
Right.
Not only as a teacher, but also as a practitioner who is very dedicated.
I'd like to ask you a little bit about your journey. Your journey was personal for a while, and then there was a transition or addition to also having an interest in teaching people. So whether it was yoga first and then mindfulness after, or however that unfolded, that's interesting. So how did that desire to share what you practiced and experienced and gained with other people?
The truth is, I never went to India for the teacher training to become a teacher.
Uh-huh.
The reason why I went there was because I couldn't afford to pay for yoga classes here in the Philippines. It was costing me too much.
Right.
And I just figured that it would cost me a lot less if I were to invest and go to India and learn it and become more committed through immersing myself and then coming back here so that I'm not dependent on any teacher. Right. That's the reason why I went. Now, consequently, I came back with a certificate, an authorization from the Indian government to teach. Right. So I went with it. And it's the same way with becoming a meditation or mindfulness teacher. I never really sought out to become a teacher. And in fact, it was a big surprise to me when one day I received news that I had been nominated for the community Dharma leadership training at Spirit Rock. And that was a really scary time for me because, mind you, I was deported. And it was 18 years already. I had not tried to go back to the US because I was so traumatized.
Right.
So there was no way I was ever going to go back, because there was one time when I did try to go back in the beginning when I first got deported, that I went to the immigration and the embassy, and the guy behind the desk looks at me and says, "What makes you think I'm going to let a criminal into my country?" And that for me was the last straw. I was not going to put myself through that again. And then here I am, I get nominated for the Spirit Rock training because of the commitment and the dedication and the love that I had for the Dharma.
Right.
And then I'm like, oh no, I have to, like, if they accept me, then I have to go back to get a visa.
So you have to go back to the immigration, right?
I was like, oh my God. I mean, I was so nervous for a really long time. And then, of course, I didn't have money. I couldn't fly to California, and I couldn't afford to pay for this training. But wow, what happened? I got a scholarship, and then all the more I was forced to go and apply for a visa, because how could I possibly turn my back on this opportunity? This is the actual unfoldment of the Dharma. It's all opening for me. My practice is there showing the fruits. So finally I went, and
it was some of that Indian serendipity expanding beyond the borders of India.
Yeah, and the thing is my life has been that way ever since I can remember. And I think it really most started to show itself during those Grateful Dead times. That was happening already.
Right.
Long before.
Right. Same here.
So, yeah. And so eventually, of course, I ended up going to the embassy, and I asked, of course, I applied for my visa, and the guy behind this, now there's a plastic shield in front of him. It was no longer a desk where I entered the office, but now,
right.
People line up and you just kind of go through the queue. And the guy behind that window was like looking at the computer, looking sort of confused. So I said, hey, I don't know if it shows you there that I was deported in 1997. And, so I told him the whole story. And at the end of my story, he says to me, the easiest thing for any of us here, and then he just points to the people behind him, and he says, the easiest thing for any of us here to do is say no.
Right.
Give you back your passport and send you off. But you seem like a really nice and honest person. So what I'll do is I'll give you back your passport now, and I will investigate to see what really happened with your case. I was like, okay, well, could you, is there any way that I can make this job easier for you? What is it that I can do to help you make these decisions faster and easier? He said, well, if you have any documents about what happened, then send them to me. So I went home, and thankfully I had all my ducks in a row with that. That's one of the biggest lessons that I learned when I got deported, was to keep your documents in line,
Right.
And so I had all of the documentation. I sent them to him, and so that's it. And then a couple of weeks went by, and I'd already forgotten that I was waiting for a call. And I don't usually answer my phone. I don't really like talking on the phone.
Right.
But finally, my phone rings, and thankfully I answered it. And the voice on the other end says, hi, this is the U.S. Embassy, and we're just wondering if you could send us your passport. And I was like, okay, great. Then, of course, I was so nervous because I thought maybe they'll send me back my passport saying you're never allowed to come back. You're like forever banned from coming into the country. And so finally, when my passport arrived, I got a 10-year multiple entry visa. And then that was another chapter, another
turn of the tide.
Yes. And that's how it all started for me. Then, coming into Spirit Rock, and we were 101 people, and I was surrounded by brilliant people. Brilliant. And I was just like, do I belong here? Of course, because I didn't intend to become a teacher in any way. But 2 years of training and learning to take my seat, and it's still, a progression and a learning process for me, how to hold this seat and how to show up in the most authentic way, because I am still human, and to be grounded, and to make sure that I am somebody that is in integrity with regard to teaching the Dhamma and to helping people in whatever way that serves them best in the time that they arrive and as they progress in the practice. And also keeping in mind that, I really want to be able to be a part of the growth of this mindful movement or the Buddhist communities here in the Philippines. So yeah, it's really interesting how things happen without you even planning.
Right. I'm interested in hearing from you about what you hope for, what you're seeing now that you've completed your training and you're teaching more, and you're also teaching yoga. So you provide a gateway, which is a common gateway, starting with kind of the body, and then making available more and more steps to people. So what do you envision in the future in the Philippines for Filipino people? And do you see like there's any kind of cultural need, might be the wrong word, but is there like a good fit there once people kind of get over some of the more like religious hurdles that they might start with? Yeah. So how do you see the evolution, and what do you hope for in the future?
Yeah, I think that I need to be very open to always offer various teachings. Say, for example, right now I'm doing mindful movement. And because of the situation that we're in with this pandemic, I know for a fact personally that I want to keep myself healthy. And that's through tuning into the needs of my body.
Right.
And that's why I'm offering mindful movement. And I feel like that's going to meet most people generally.
Right.
Not just here in the Philippines, but throughout the world.
Right.
So I need to be alert enough to know what the changing times are going to need. Now, the vision that I have for the Philippines is, that maybe one day, people will start to open up more and more to learning and connecting with the roots of the mindfulness practice if they come in through the secular doors.
Right.
Because there's such profound insights that you gain from reading the teachings or even discussing them or sharing them. It's incredible, because sometimes I would have questions about what's happening within my practice. And I remember being in Wat Suan Mok, and I had this question in my mind, and I was like, gosh, I wonder why this keeps coming up for me in my practice. And I think on one of the last days, they had a bunch of books laid out on the table. And I just decided I'll grab a random book, and I opened up to whatever page opens up for me. And funnily enough, my answer was there. The answer was right in front of my eyes. So I was like, oh, look, there it is. And sometimes, it's a matter of just really like looking into those teachings for us to be able to connect more what's happening with our personal practice. We need to integrate both. I think that there's really a lot of value, not just to sit and meditate or walk and meditate, and even just kind of be present in the moment here and now without judgment, the way it's being presented within the mindfulness field, but also to go to the more traditional teachings, the ancient teachings of the Buddha, because first of all, I want to honor those. And secondly, profound lessons and insights that you can learn when you apply your own personal experience to what is being taught. It just kind of like this big light bulb moment sometimes when you're like, oh my
Right.
God, that's it. I felt that in my body, or
Right.
that arose for me, like, and that, and even like, oh, that thought came to me when I was washing the dishes. Now I see it. I understand it because I experienced it.
Right. And in those
So
moments,
I think that that's like one of those.
yeah, in those moments, it doesn't seem like an ancient tradition in the sense of being outdated, but an ancient tradition of like, wow, this is still applicable today. And right now it really touches my practice and becomes very informative and alive. And then an ancient wisdom
Yeah.
rather than just an old book.
Yes. And that's the beauty of Buddhism, because it's, just so relevant, and especially now. And it's one of the things, I realized that when I wanted so badly to find Buddhism was the time when I was having such deep struggle. And the world might be, I don't want to generalize, okay, but there's probably a lot of people globally that are feeling this struggle right now.
Right.
And how beautiful would it be for us to be able to meet that, and to help alleviate in one way or another, even just a little, through the breath, through the connecting with ourselves and our experience, the stress and the discomfort and the confusion that we're experiencing right now.
Oh, right. Yeah, I hope so. At least that it's available, and especially with, like you say, that having to adapt. So using technology that's available too, to be able to just make these practices available to people. So let's hope that people find their way to some kind of relief one way or another, and that this one's available for people.
Yes, and that's why I'm grateful for people like you that keep doing the work too. So thanks.
I thank you as well. You're doing great work as well, and glad to see things are alive and growing even more in the Philippines.
Yeah, and it would be great for us to continue to collaborate in these ways where we're building bridges, and we're filling the gaps. And it's not just about the Philippines, but how do we as a global community really work together to make this more a reality for everybody.
Right. Well, the one thing that this time has taught us that we can reach out to each other pretty easily. So yeah, let's make that happen.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks to you too, Zach. And I wish you a lot of happiness and amazing health. And yeah, thank you. Appreciate all the work that you do.
Yeah, you're welcome. Health and happiness to you as well. It's exactly what I was going to say.
Thank you.
I know for a lot of podcast listeners, as soon as the fundraising requests start up, you just kind of zone out or skip ahead till it's over. But I ask that if you're taking the time to listen to our full podcast, that you also take the time to consider our spiel. Some may assume that producing a 2-hour episode wouldn't take much more time than the conversation itself, but there's so much more that goes into it. Several weeks in advance, our content team reviews the biography and any works of the upcoming guest and discusses the best way to use our limited time together. After the interview is completed, the raw audio file is sent to our sound engineer. A single episode can take him up to 2 days of solid work, which is carefully coordinated with our content team to ensure smooth listening. More work is done preparing the introduction of the guest and other segments, particularly the post-interview reflection, and then mixing them back together to upload to the hosting site, delivering the podcast that eventually reaches your ears. And that's not even counting the written work accompanying the episodes we craft for our website and podcast feed. Many of these steps require an outlay of funds in some form or another to support the process. We hope that each episode provides you with much inspirational and informative Dhamma content. And if so, we also hope that you can consider supporting our mission. If you would like to join in our mission to share the Dhamma from the Golden Land more widely, we welcome your contribution. in any form, currency, or transfer method. Every cent goes immediately and directly to sustaining the programming. You can give right on our website via credit card by going to insightmyanmar.org/donation or through PayPal by going to paypal.me/insightmyanmar. We also take donation through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. In all cases, simply search Insight Myanmar on each platform and you'll find our account. Alternatively, you can also visit our website for specific links to any of these respective accounts, or feel free to email us at info@insightmyanmar.org. In all cases, that's Insight Myanmar, one word, spelled INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you would like to give in another way, please contact us. Thank you for your kind consideration. You have been listening to the Insight Myanmar podcast. We would appreciate it very much if you would be willing to rate, review, and/or share this podcast. Every little bit of feedback helps. If you are interested, you can subscribe to the Insight Myanmar podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, please check out our website for a list of our complete episodes, including additional text, videos, and other information at www.insightmyanmar.org. That's Insight Myanmar, one word, INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you cannot find our feed on your podcast player, please let us know and we will ensure that it can be offered there. There was certainly a lot to talk about in this episode, and we'd like to encourage listeners to keep the discussion going. Make a post, request specific questions, and join in our discussions on the Insight Myanmar podcast Facebook group. You are also most welcome to follow our Facebook and Instagram accounts by the same name of Insight Myanmar. And if you're not on Facebook, you can also message us directly at burmadhamma@gmail.com. That's BURMADHAMMA@gmail.com, and we're also active on Dhamma Wheel. If you'd like to start up a discussion group on another platform, let us know and we can share that forum here. Finally, we're open to suggestions about guests or topics for future episodes, so if you have someone or something in mind, please do be in touch. We would also like to take this time to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, especially our two sound engineers, Martin Combs and Tharng A. There's of course Zach Hessler, content collaborator and part-time co-host. Ken Pransky helps with editing. Dragos Bandita and Andre Francois produce original artwork, and a special Mongolian volunteer who is asked to remain anonymous does our social media templates. We'd also like to thank everyone who assisted us in arranging for the guests we have interviewed so far. And of course, we send a big thank you to the guests themselves for agreeing to come and share such powerful personal stories. Finally, we are immensely grateful for the donors who made this entire thing possible. We also remind our listeners that the opinions expressed by our guests are their own and not necessarily reflective of the host or other podcast contributors. Please also note, as we are mainly a volunteer team, we do not have the capacity to fact-check our guest interviews. By virtue of being invited on our show, there is a trust that they will be truthful and not misrepresent themselves or others. If you have any concerns about the statements made on this or other shows, please contact us. This recording is the exclusive right of Insight Myanmar podcast and may not be used without the expressed written permission of the podcast owner, which includes video, audio, written transcripts, and excerpts of any episodes. It is also not meant to be used for commercial purposes. On the other hand, we are very open to collaboration, so if you have a particular idea in mind for sharing any of our podcasts or podcast-related information, please feel free to contact us with your proposal. As you know, our podcasts are 100% listener-supported. We welcome your contribution in any amount, denomination, and transfer method. You may give via Patreon at patreon.com/insightmyanmar, via PayPal at paypal.me/insightmyanmar, or by credit card by going to insightmyanmar.org/donation. In all cases, that's Insight Myanmar, one word, INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you'd like to give especially to support our new run of coronavirus episodes, please go on the GoFundMe site and search Insight Myanmar to find our campaign. If you are in Myanmar and would like to give a cash donation, please feel free to get in touch with us. Thanks, and see you next show.